Kyle approached his sister, Louise, hoping she could help him with a dilemma. He needed an outfit for a medical-themed fancy dress party, and their mother, who worked at a hospital, had promised to bring home some surgical gowns. Unfortunately, she had been delayed and couldn't follow through. Since Louise was also a nurse at the same hospital, Kyle asked if she had anything suitable for him to wear. "Well, little brother, I think I can find something," she said with a grin. "But first, let's see what we're working with. Go ahead and strip down." A bit taken aback by her directness, Kyle hesitated but then decided to follow her lead, standing before her in his underwear. Louise nodded approvingly. "Oh, I think we can make this work. Will you follow my instructions exactly?" she asked. "What do you mean?" Kyle replied, uncertain. "I just need you to agree, so we're on the same page," she explained. "Do you want my help or not?" All right, he conceded. "I'll do whatever you say." "Good. Let's get you fitted into your new uniform," Louise said with a smile. She retrieved one of her nursing uniforms from the wardrobe and helped him into it. It was a perfect fit. "You'll look just like me," she observed, a hint of amusement in her voice. "Now, we just need to add a few essentials and accessories, and you'll be all set." Louise surveyed him critically. "Those hairy legs and arms will have to go, and we need to tidy up your hair. A manicure wouldn't hurt either." Kyle was taken aback. He had expected a simple solution, perhaps a spare operating gown, but the idea of dressing up as a nurse intrigued him. Growing up, they had both been involved with Street John's ambulance, and while Louise pursued a full nursing career, he stayed active as a first aider. Now, with his factory facing closure after a takeover, he found himself reflecting on a past Christmas party when they had swapped uniforms for fun. He remembered the surprising freedom he felt in her feminine dress uniform, though he had never explored that feeling again. Louise led him to the bathroom, handing him a bottle of hair removal cream. "Do your arms, legs, and shave that chin. I'll get a few things ready for you." When Kyle returned, freshly smooth, Louise handed him a pair of their mother's control underwear. "Put these on. They'll keep everything in place," she instructed with a playful smile. "Don't worry, I won't peek." Next, she handed him a pair of new white tights. "We just started wearing these at work. Pull them on slowly. Look at that sheen. Isn't it gorgeous?" Kyle couldn't deny the luxurious feel of the semi-opaque tights on his bare legs. They looked smooth and flawless. "Now," Louise said, "let's get you into a bra." "I think my bra will fit you," Louise said, fastening it behind him. She stuffed the cups with old tights, and Kyle noticed he was starting to take on a more feminine shape. "Now, hands up," she instructed, slipping a cotton slip over his head that flowed smoothly down his body. "Perfect. Put on this robe, slip into my slippers, and sit at the dressing table." Louise then brushed out his shoulder-length hair, gathering it neatly into a bun and pinning it securely. She applied light foundation, shaped his eyebrows with a pencil, added a touch of mascara and eyeshadow, and finished with a soft pink lipstick. Finally, she filed his nails and applied a clear coat of varnish. "Let that dry," Louise instructed before leaving the room briefly. Kyle sat quietly, absorbing the unfamiliar scents and sensations. He hadn't seen himself yet, nor had he even had a moment to protest. Louise had simply taken charge, and he found he didn't mind at all. In a few minutes, she returned, now dressed in her own nurse's uniform and holding one for him. "All dry? Perfect. Go ahead and put this on." The uniform buttoned down the front and was finished with a red elastic belt featuring a sturdy clasp. She handed him a pair of white, sensible lace-up shoes with a low heel, snug but wearable. Finally, she placed a nurse's cap over his pinned-up hair and took a step back to admire her work. "Now, stand up, little sister, and let's see how you look in the mirror." "Close your eyes, now open them," Louise instructed. Kyle opened his eyes and saw two nurses staring back at him. For a moment, he couldn't tell which reflection was his and which was Louise. Only when he looked to his left and saw Louise smiling did he realize how similar they looked. "That's incredible," he exclaimed. "We really do look like sisters." Louise chuckled, clearly pleased with her handiwork. "I'm surprised too. No one would recognize you." Then her face lit up with an idea. "Wait here," she said, disappearing from the room. A few minutes later, she returned, dressed in his clothes, with her makeup removed and her hair styled down like he typically wore his. Mom will be home soon. Let's see if we can pull one over on her. They headed downstairs, Kyle taking careful steps in the unfamiliar shoes. Despite his nerves about how his mother might react, he was surprised at how comfortable he felt dressed this way. They sat in each other's usual chairs and switched on the television, casually falling into their routine. When their mother arrived, arms full with the hot takeaway, she barely looked up. "Hello, dears. Kyle, take these, will you?" Without missing a beat, Louise jumped up and took the bags from her. Their mother turned to Kyle. "Oh, Louise, Oliver is at the door. He says he has a message for you. Didn't tell me what it was, but be quick." Kyle froze. It was one thing to fool his mother, but his sister's boyfriend. The thought made his heart race. Louise shot him a pointed look, eyes urging him onward, as if to say, "You've got this, just go." Kyle stood at the front door, heart pounding, as Oliver greeted him casually. "I can't stop, just wanted to ask if you'd like to go to a party tomorrow. Didn't want to come in with my work clothes on." He hasn't noticed, Kyle thought, trying to keep his composure. In his best attempt at mimicking Louise's voice, he replied, yes, that would be great. "What time?" "About 8, I'll pick you up." Oliver smiled, leaning in. Before Kyle could react, Oliver pressed a kiss to his lips. The shot kept Kyle frozen, and Oliver, misreading the stillness, deepened the kiss with a brief brush of his tongue against Kyle's lips. "See you tomorrow," Oliver said, grinning as he turned and left. Kyle stood in stunned silence on the doorstep, the reality of what just happened slowly sinking in. Kyle walked back into the house, his mind racing with strange new feelings. He had always liked girls, but there was something about that kiss, received while he was dressed as a girl, that left a tingling sensation he couldn't quite shake. He sat down at the table, and Louise gave him a teasing look. "Well, what did Loverboy want?" "You look a little flustered," she said, mimicking the kind of playful teasing Kyle would normally dish out. "Oh, we're going to a party tomorrow night," he replied, stumbling over his words. "And did he give you your goodnight kiss?" Louise continued to bait him with a grin. Kyle blushed. Just a peck," he said, a shy smile forming despite himself. Louise smirked, thinking, "Well, he fooled my boyfriend, and Mom hasn't caught on yet. Now, you two, no more silliness," their mom said as she set the table. The atmosphere settled back into a semblance of normal, but the experience lingered in Kyle's thoughts. "Eat up," their mother urged as she started to clear the table. "Kyle, will you run me an errand after tea? I forgot to get tonight's paper." "No problem, Mom," Louise replied quickly. After their mother left the room, she began to clear away the dishes. "Sit down, dear. I don't want you to spoil your uniform." "I didn't buy those clothes for Kyle," their mother continued, a knowing smile on her face. "Do you think you'll be able to get him into one of your uniforms?" "So, a conspiracy," Kyle thought, a mischievous smile creeping onto his face. "Let's play along." "I think he'll be putty in our hands," Louise said, her excitement evident. "I've always wanted to see what he'd look like as a girl." "Me too," Kyle chimed in, playing his part. "You don't think he'll mind? It's just a bit of fun, right?" "No, I'm sure he'll find it a good laugh," Louise reassured, her eyes sparkling with mischief. With the plan in motion, they settled down to watch television, the thrill of the evening's possibilities lingering in the air. The evening had flowed in its usual rhythm, nothing seeming out of place. Kyle's mother was busy rummaging through tapes, trying to find one to record Coronation Street or EastEnders, just like any other night. But Kyle's nerves were growing as the clock ticked past 7:15 p.m., and Louise still hadn't returned. She was due to start her shift at 8 p.m., and normally her colleague Molly would call for her around this time. As if on cue, the doorbell rang. Kyle's heart skipped a beat as he opened the door to find Molly standing there. Sorry I'm a bit early," Molly said, looking at her watch. "If you're ready, I'd like to get to work for 7:45. I have a meeting starting at 8. Kyle panicked internally, but managed to say, "Just a moment, I'll get my things." "Please, Louise, get back here now," he thought frantically as he hurried upstairs. To stall, he pretended to fuss around looking for Louise's name badge and coat, hoping she would walk through the door any second. Just as the anxiety began to rise, he heard the front door open and the sound of Louise rushing in. She bolted up the stairs, her face flushed. "Sorry I was late," she whispered breathlessly. "I got caught up chatting with some of Mom's friends." "Molly's ready to go now," Kyle said, relief flooding him. Louise quickly grabbed her uniform and badge, fixing her hair in the mirror before flashing Kyle a grateful smile. Crisis averted. Kyle's face flushed with worry as Louise pleaded, "I'm sorry. She told me she'd be early, and I forgot. I can't keep her waiting, please. Kyle, just go as me. I'll catch up once I've changed." "I can't go like this," Kyle protested, wringing his hands. "What if someone notices?" "Don't be silly, my boyfriend hasn't noticed. Neither has Mom or Molly. It'll just be 15 minutes, max," Louise urged, with an encouraging smile. With no time to argue, Kyle reluctantly grabbed her cape, complete with her name badge, ID cards, and even her handbag, and followed Molly out to her car. Molly chatted away as they drove, filling the silence, while Kyle answered as minimally as possible with nods and ahas. He was grateful for her obliviousness. Each response kept his nerves at bay. They finally arrived at the nurses' parking area. Thankfully, only a few people were around, and Kyle took a deep breath, trying to keep calm. He recognized the layout Louise had shown him around before, so he followed Molly's lead with familiarity. "All right, see you later," Molly said with a grin. "Got to go upstairs to that meeting. And cheer up, it may never happen." Kyle managed a weak smile, nodding as he watched her disappear down the hallway, hoping Louise would arrive any minute to end his short-lived, nerve-wracking impersonation. As Molly disappeared in the lift, Kyle made his way to the admin area, trying to maintain an air of calm. He passed a few colleagues, politely returning their smiles and feeling somewhat relieved at their lack of suspicion. Louise's desk, situated in a large partitioned room, was tidy but had a small pile of mail in her tray. To kill time, Kyle began sorting through it, barely aware of his surroundings. Suddenly, he felt a gentle kiss on the back of his neck, and he froze. "Oh my God, who what?" he stammered, whipping around. Dr. Turner Reed chuckled, looking pleased with himself. "Don't worry, Louise, just teasing." Kyla saw his name badge and instantly recognized him as the hospital Romeo Louise had occasionally ranted about. He remembered her saying that Dr. Reed's charm had so far kept anyone from officially complaining, though many were growing tired of his antics. The doctor settled himself onto the edge of Louise's desk, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "So, what are you up to after your shift?" he asked, leaning in with a familiar grin. Kyle swallowed, willing himself to stay composed. "Sleeping. On my own. Thank you," he replied coolly, hoping that would end the conversation. Just then, a series of urgent beeps sounded from Dr. Reed's pager. He glanced at it and sighed, his expression turning serious. "There's been a major road accident. They're short-staffed in A and E." Without another word, Dr. Reed rushed off, leaving Kyle with a mix of relief and dread. He hoped Louise would show up soon, before he found himself tangled in any more close calls. As Dr. Reed hurried off, he barbed over his shoulder, "They need me now. Nurses too, come on." Kyle's heart raced. He knew that Louise had never worked in A and E, and the thought of stepping into such chaos made him panic. "But it's not my specialty," he tried to protest. "All hands to the pumps, now." The doctor snapped, clearly not in the mood for excuses. He wasn't taking no for an answer. Kyle quickly locked Louise's bag in her desk and, thinking fast, scribbled a note explaining what had happened. He placed it where Louise would easily find it, hoping she would arrive soon and understand the situation. Then, with no other options, he followed Dr. Reed toward the emergency department. As they neared A and E, ambulances were already arriving. The radio crackled with updates apparently. A coach had veered off the road and rolled over. Fortunately, there were no life-threatening injuries, but a large number of people were being brought in with cuts, bruises, and minor trauma. It was going to be a long night. Suddenly, the senior houseman called out, "I need a doctor and a nurse to head out to the accident site to assist the paramedics. You two go now." He pointed directly at Dr. Reed and Kyle. Kyle's stomach sank. Totally compromised, he thought as he was thrust further into a situation that spiraled out of control. The senior houseman motioned toward an ambulance about to leave. There are jackets and equipment inside. Get going. Kyle had no choice. There was no way to back out now without raising suspicion. He knew just enough about first aid to manage, but he was far from confident. Still, adrenaline kicked in as he climbed into the ambulance alongside Dr. Reed. The situation had swept him along, and all he could do was hope to get through the night without anyone discovering the truth. As the ambulance sped toward the accident site, Kyle caught a glimpse of Louise stepping out of a taxi just outside the hospital. Too late, big sister, he thought wryly. 10 minutes later, they arrived at the scene. The reports had been accurate. Most of the passengers were walking wounded, but the driver was in a more serious condition, trapped under the dashboard of the overturned coach. Kyle got to work, tending to those with minor injuries, slings, bandages, and quick patch-ups, while ambulances shuttled the injured back to the hospital. "Louise, come down here, please." Dr. Turner's voice rang out from the front of the coach, where the driver was pinned. "I need your help to stop this man from bleeding. We have to get him out fast. The coach could roll over again." Kyle swallowed hard as he approached. The ground was a mess of mud and blood, and the driver's legs were crushed under the twisted metal of the dashboard. As Kyle crouched down to assist, he felt the mud squelch under him, soaking through Louise's shoes and tights. "She's going to love the state of her uniform," he thought with grim humor. But there was no time for those thoughts. The situation was dire. The driver was losing blood fast, and the risk of the coach shifting added even more urgency. Kyle's hands worked on autopilot, following Dr. Reed's instructions as they applied pressure to the wounds, trying to stabilize the man until the fire brigade arrived with cutting equipment. One of the driver's legs was severely crushed, and keeping him stable was no easy task. Kyle wiped sweat from his brow, his mind focused only on the task at hand, pushing aside the anxiety and the absurdity of the situation. His only hope now was that they could get the driver out in time and that Louise, now at the hospital, wouldn't be too far behind. The flashing lights of the cameras caught Kyle off guard as the press and TV crews arrived at the accident site. They eagerly snapped photos of him and Dr. Reed working to save the trapped driver, their cameras focusing especially on the pretty young nurse kneeling in the mud. Just what I need, Kyle thought, cringing inwardly. The last thing he wanted was attention, especially with him posing as Louise. Back at the hospital, Louise had followed Kyle's note and rushed to A&E to track down her brother. She had just stepped into the department when her ward sister greeted her with a puzzled look. "Hello, Louise. I thought you were at the accident," the ward sister said, eyeing her curiously. "In fact, I'm sure I saw you leave. How did you get back so soon and cleaned up already?" Before Louise could answer, the TV in the corner of the room flashed to the live news coverage of the accident. To her horror, there on the screen was Kyle, wearing her uniform, assisting with the rescue. She froze, her mind racing as the enormity of the situation sank in. "Oh no, this little joke has gone way too far," she thought. The ward sister's expression turned from confusion to stern suspicion. "These are live pictures, Louise," she said sharply, pointing at the TV. "It seems you're in two places at once. My office. Now." Louise's heart pounded as she followed her sister into the office, the door closing behind them with a definitive click. The sister turned to face her, arms crossed. "I was just thinking that one of my best nurses was making the hospital proud in front of the media. Now I find you standing here in my office, while you are also at the scene of the accident. So, what's going on?" Louise's mind raced. She needed a quick explanation, something believable that wouldn't get Kyle into serious trouble. After a brief pause, she said, "It's not quite what it seems, sister. That's actually my brother out there. It was supposed to be a harmless joke. He was just going to cover for me for a few minutes while I sorted something out. But then the accident happened, and everything spiraled out of control." The ward sister raised an eyebrow. "Your brother? Dressed as you? And you thought this was a good idea?" "It wasn't meant to go this far," Louise admitted, her face reddening. "I'm really sorry. I'll take full responsibility for it." But Kyle was only trying to help. The ward sister sighed heavily, rubbing her temples. "This is a complete mess, Louise. You and your brother have put yourselves and this hospital in an incredibly difficult position. We'll need to handle this delicately, especially with the media involved. Louise nodded, grateful the sister wasn't completely losing her temper. What should I do? First, we need to get him out of there before anyone else figures out what's going on. Then we'll figure out how to clean up this mess without it blowing up in our faces. The sister picked up the phone. I'm going to make a call to get someone to relieve your brother. In the meantime, you'll have to make sure this doesn't get any worse. Louise's heart pounded as she scrambled to salvage the situation, knowing full well how deep she and Kyle were in trouble. She couldn't give him away, but she had to come up with something convincing to protect both of them. She's my twin sister, Kelly, Louise said, trying to sound as calm and confident as possible. I knew I'd be late tonight, and she offered to cover for me. It's usually quiet during the first hour of my shift, so we thought it would be okay. She forced a smile, hoping the ward sister would buy it. The ward sister raised an eyebrow skeptically. And is this twin sister of yours a qualified nurse? She asked, her tone pointed. Louise hesitated, but finally admitted, well, sort of. Not fully qualified. She's a street John ambulance nurse. The ward sister crossed her arms, eyeing Louise carefully. So she's not a total beginner, then she said, her tone softening slightly. That's something, at least. I started with street John ambulance myself, and I believe you did too. Louise nodded, feeling a small glimmer of relief. But, Louise, the ward sister continued, her expression stern, you've put me in an incredibly difficult position. The chief executive loves good publicity, and right now, your sister or Kelly, as we're calling her, will be in the spotlight. The media has already captured her helping out at the accident, and the hospital will be eager to push this as a positive story. But people have seen you here, so we need to come up with a plan fast, or we'll all be in hot water. Louise bit her lip, realizing the gravity of what the ward sister was saying. I understand, sister. What should we do? The ward sister paced the room for a moment, thinking. Here's the problem, we can't have unqualified nurses running around this hospital, no matter how competent they seem. And you don't want this deception coming to light, for your sake and for your sister's. We need to keep the chief executive happy while keeping your sister's true identity quiet. She stopped pacing and looked directly at Louise. Here's what we'll do. When your sister returns from the accident, we'll have her slip away quietly before anyone starts asking too many questions. You'll then change into your uniform and step in, taking her place for the remainder of your shift. The media will be satisfied. They'll assume it was you the whole time. But you need to be prepared for any follow-up. If they ask about this later, we'll need to stick to the story. Louise felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. The plan might work, but it relied on quick thinking and keeping up the deception. I'll make sure it goes smoothly, sister. Thank you for helping with this. Don't thank me yet, the ward sister said with a sigh. This isn't over, and if anything else goes wrong, the consequences could be far worse for both of you. Louise nodded, knowing she had no choice but to see it through and hope Kyle would get out of the accident scene before anyone else realized who he really was. Louise couldn't believe how quickly the ward sister had mobilized to cover their tracks. Kelly was now officially an agency nurse, thanks to a bit of paperwork magic. It was both a relief and an added pressure. Louise knew she'd need to keep up this charade to avoid putting everyone in a compromising position. As she walked down the corridor, she rehearsed what she would say to Kyle. He would not be pleased to hear he'd been officially put on the hospital's books as a nurse, even temporarily. She shook her head, almost laughing at the absurdity of it all. Kyle, her brother, accidentally promoted to an agency nurse, all because of a last-minute plan gone sideways. When she reached A&E, Louise spotted Kyle stepping out of the ambulance, looking tired, disheveled, and definitely worse for wear after the accident scene. His mud street uniform and drained expression were evidence enough of the chaotic ordeal he'd just been through. As he approached, he gave her a weary look. Kelly, she whispered urgently, forcing a smile. You did amazing, but we need to get you out of here before anyone starts asking questions. Let's get you a shower and a fresh uniform. Kyle shook his head in disbelief. Louise, you owe me big time. That was no ordinary first day. I know, Louise replied, trying to keep her tone light. But listen, thanks to sister, you're now officially on record as an agency. All you have to do is slip out quietly, and we can say it was me the whole time. Kyle let out a sigh. Next time you only lunch, and not in a hospital cafeteria. Deal, Louise whispered, guiding him toward the staff showers. They both knew they weren't out of the reeds yet, but for now, they'd survived the day's madness. As Louise walked into the hospital, she was startled to see her mother, clearly anxious, waiting near the entrance. Her mom must have seen the TV coverage and rushed over in a panic. Louise quickly pulled her aside, trying to prevent a scene. "Oh my God, Louise," her mother whispered, trying to keep her voice steady. "Which one of my babies is it out there? Is that you?" "Yes, Mom, but listen carefully," Louise said, lowering her voice. She quickly explained the entire situation: the cover-up, Kyle pretending to be her, and the elaborate lie about the non-existent Kelly. Her mother took it all in, eyes wide, but she nodded, surprisingly calm, and went along with the charade. The ambulance doors opened and Kyle emerged, still assisting with the injured driver. His hands were covered in blood as he kept pressure on the man's wounds. The A&E nurses immediately took over, whisking the patient away. Kyle, exhausted, stepped back and wiped his brow, trying to steady himself after the chaos. Before Louise could reach him, Dr. Turner appeared, strolling over with his usual overconfidence. "Fine job tonight, Louise," he said, mischief twinkling in his eyes, and before anyone could stop him, he leaned in and gave Kyle an affectionate peck on the cheek. Louise's eyes widened. No, this is my sister Kelly," she said quickly, emphasizing the name and hoping it didn't sound too forced. "She's an agency nurse, and this was her first night." Dr. Turner blinked, then his smile widened. "Well now," he said, intrigued, "I know Louise hasn't fallen for my charms and is already taken." He turned to Kyle, eyes twinkling with interest. "But how about you, my dear? Any suitors?" Caught off guard, Kyle stammered without thinking, no one at the moment." Dr. Turner's smile grew even broader. "Excellent. How about dinner with me tomorrow night? A little reward for your hard work tonight." Kyle, feeling trapped in the whirlwind of lies, glanced at Louise, who looked back with a mixture of amusement and panic. Kyle hesitated, trying to figure out a way to decline without blowing the cover. Louise quickly intervened. "I'm sure Kelly would love to, but she's leaving town tomorrow." "Right, sis," she said, giving Kyle a pointed look, hoping he'd catch on. Yeah, right," Kyle quickly added. "Unfortunately, I'll be gone." Dr. Turner looked a little disappointed, but he smiled graciously. "Another time then, Kelly. I'll hold you to it." As Dr. Turner walked away, Louise's mother gave Kyle a sympathetic pat on the back. "Well, that was close," she whispered. Kyle just groaned, rubbing his temples. "I'm never covering for you again." As Dr. Turner left the room after giving Kyle another kiss on the cheek, the flash of a camera went off, capturing the moment perfectly. The headline practically wrote itself: "Gallant doctor and nurse's family together, a picture that would no doubt make waves in tomorrow's news." "Come on, Kelly," the A&E sister said with a smile, guiding Kyle toward the nurse's changing room. "Let's get you cleaned up." Louise watched, still a bit in shock at how smoothly the charade had gone. "I'll follow in a few minutes," she said, turning to head to the sister's office to grab a fresh uniform for Kyle. Meanwhile, Kyle was in a whirlwind of confusion. Everyone from his mother to the staff was calling him Kelly. He'd been kissed twice by a doctor and had spent the entire night dressed in Louise's nurse uniform. And strangely, he realized that not only had he managed to pull off the deception, but a part of him liked it, really liked it. As Louise caught up with him, he gave her a weary, bewildered look. "Oh, Louise, what are we to do?" he muttered, still trying to process everything. Louise sighed, a bit of a smile tugging at her lips despite the chaos. "Don't worry, Kelly. I think you're going to be just fine." Then, as if things couldn't get any stranger, Louise's mother leaned in and said, "By the way, Kyle, your foreman came by after you left. The factory's closed. You've lost your job." Kyle blinked in surprise. "What? The factory's closed?" "Don't worry, Mom," Louise said, her voice suddenly light with humor. "I think we just found him another one." Kyle groaned, realizing what she meant. "You're joking, right?" But Louise just gave him a playful wink. "Welcome to the family business, Kelly.